The Global Briefing on SAfm.
And it's good morning to Dr. Joan Swart, a researcher in military science at the University of Stellenbosch. Doc, good morning to you. Thanks very much for joining us. The big news is Germany spearheading to get Ukraine as an associate EU member. What's an associate membership?
Yes, good morning, John. That basically puts them it signals long-term political commitment to Ukraine. So associate membership is not, of course, a full membership, but it sort of signals that there may be a path to a full membership. And critics, including myself, argue that proposals like this appear to be less focused on a conflict resolution in Ukraine and more on reinforcing long-term geopolitical confrontation with Russia, which is, of course, a big problem. So they are signaling and hoping that this kind of associate membership could deepen economic integration, increase their alignment institutionally, and it's sort of more of a symbolic reassurance to Ukraine that they will have their back. But from the Russia side, we must remember, and I also argue that it's mainly, to me, a provocation that could provoke further Russian objectives. And Putin's inner circle, like Medvedev and General Bortnikov of the FSB, they are kind of getting impatient with a lack of reaction to all of these provocations. And as you may know, as your listeners may know, from a Russian perspective, they have repeatedly argued since the late 1990s that they do not want NATO to expand eastwardly.
There is a difference between EU membership and NATO membership.
Yes, of course there is. It's two completely different organizations. NATO is basically led still by the US, where EU is a political conglomeration that started as an economic project and moved more into a geopolitical bloc, and they include all the European countries that qualify to be part of the EU.
Is this a transitional bridge to full membership, or do you think it'll just be like Ukraine will have permanent second-tier status?
Well, I don't know if it'll be permanent second-tier status. One never knows when this conflict goes away what the new kind of thing, shiny new thing would be. But it may be they are signaling that it may create a path to full membership. But we must remember that full membership comes with different requirements, including economic stability, and Ukraine is very, very far from that.
Okay, now nearly 30 years after two civilian aircraft were shot down near Cuba, former Cuban President Raúl Castro has been charged in the United States. 30 years have been passed since the downing of those aircraft. Is there any evidence that's finally enabled prosecutors to bring murder and conspiracy charges here?
No, there is absolutely no new evidence. So it's still hugely contested, politically and legally contested. And of course, the US and international investigations say that they've concluded the aircraft was in international airspace, even at that time when it happened. And while Cuba has historically argued that they repeatedly violated Cuban airspace and posed a security threat. Now that civilian aircraft was it's civilian, technically speaking, yes, but it was linked to anti-Castro activist groups, especially Brothers to the Rescue. And I just want to remind you and the listeners that Raúl Castro is now 94 years old. He has a birthday in 2 weeks, I believe. So, this indictment, I view it as more strategically symbolic than practically judicial. And it's the US is moving up this escalation ladder with Cuba in order to increase their pressure. I mean, the embargo started in 1960 already. It's been 66 years of economic warfare against this country.
Cuba doesn't extradite its officials. So is there potential of another capture and trial approach like we've seen before?
Yes, I've seen chatter around that. It is most certainly possible, sort of a Venezuela situation. But we'll have to see. At this stage, I can see no confirmed indication that they will undergo such imminent military action. But as it looks like they're kind of winding down in Iran and the Middle East, this may be their new thing again, to kind of rack up a new win, which is very important for President Trump.
All right, let's talk about this flotilla. 400 activists were detained aboard a Gaza-bound aid flotilla. They were deported after videos. And what happened is we've seen these Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir taunting the detainees. Has that changed the view and strained Israel's diplomatic relations?
It definitely does have an impact, but so does the thousands of videos that we've seen over the past 2 years. So as you say, it's really a political, legal, and more importantly, a reputational issue for Israel that they will have great difficulty walking back from. So as you know, I mean, first of all, this event, or nearly called it an accident, it wasn't an incident, was seen as an illegal seizure and kidnapping in international waters. And together with the abusive treatment and detention conditions and the video that's come to light, it's triggered quite a bit of international criticism, including démarche by several governments. I believe that Spain, Portugal, and Turkey, I think, have called in the Israeli diplomats into their offices to come and explain.
As you say, Turkey facilitated the deportation of citizens from various nations. What does that mean? Yeah. What's the potential for future humanitarian attempts to bypass this blockade?
It will most certainly be attempted again, and it has before. But Israel will just, act in the same way. But we need to understand that this is kind of this caused an unusual public disagreement between the Israeli officials, which suggests to me that they have differing views regarding the proportionality of this reaction or behavior, but more importantly, that international optics that it creates, which is very important nowadays. So modern conflicts are increasingly fought not only militarily, but through information, legitimacy, and especially global perception. So that has become part of it all. And Israel is kind of losing the battle in this sense.
Dr. Joan Swart, have you got a feeling of what's happening in Israel? Every now and again, you'll get a report that Israelis are not happy with the current situation. What are you hearing?
Unfortunately, what I'm hearing is quite the opposite. I believe Netanyahu may be under a little bit of pressure, but you need to realize that his whole government in the Knesset, and you mentioned Ben-Gvir, he's one of the examples of this. They're even more right-wing, and I think this type of actions, and what they're doing in Gaza and in the West Bank, I believe they've got by far the majority of support amongst the public, which is of course the result of many years of information and propaganda and so on. But that's where we are. So even replacing Netanyahu, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Dr. Joan Swart is researcher in military science at the University of Stellenbosch.